What's up, guys? Pete Kopech here. Thank you so much for taking a minute to check out our home buying workshop. In this video, we're going to take you through pretty much the entire home buying process. We're going to dispel some facts and some fears, or I should say dispel some fears, and really just give you the information that you need to make the best decision possible when it comes to buying or even selling a home in the New Jersey, more specifically North Jersey market. So I'm here with my my partner in crime, I almost want to say. Like, we do so much together. This is Scott Cummings from Annie Mac. Scott, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. We're excited to have you here. So, all right. So I'm going to start off. My name is Pete Kopech. We may have already met. If not, I hope that we get to meet one day soon. And really, you know, I've been in the real estate business. I'm a real estate agent. I've been in the business about 8 years. And pretty early on in my career, I recognized that there's not a one-size-fits-all process for every real estate agent, the way it always works out, and that there actually is a pretty big gap of information provided to a home buyer or even a seller for that matter before they actually hit the road. So that's a good part of why I'm here. Like I said, been in business for about 8 years as of the filming of this, which is 2023. And we have a couple investment properties, own our home. Won't go into too much of that. But Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So as Pete mentioned, my name is Scott Cummings with Annie Mac. Been working with Pete for the better half of about 7 years at this point. Helped me with my own home. Part of the reason why we started this together was really we recognized that there is a shortage of information. We've dealt with a ton of first-time home buyers that all seem to have the same issues, just not being provided a clear picture as to what needs to be done in order to purchase a home.
Awesome, man. Thanks again for being here. So,
of course.
All right, cool. So we always say, right, congratulations to anybody who's watching this or is maybe starting by watching some of this, because this is really like your first step.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, I always joke that the first step is really Zillow at 1 o'clock in the morning, but yeah, this is the first real step.
So what we're going to cover today, we're going to cover, like I mentioned, the fears and facts. Let's see. We're going to cover the fears and facts, the realities of buying in a market, right? Things change a little bit, so we're going to kind of talk about how to approach any market. We're going to go over your 10 simple steps of homeownership, and then what the next steps would be. So, you know, let's kick it off with some of the fears and facts. So what are some of the things, right? Because we always know, you know, when we talk to people in general, we hear like, oh, I'd love to buy a home, but, or I'd love to do something this year, but. Like, what are some of the things you hear when you talk to clients?
Yeah, I think it's just a really daunting process that people don't really know where to begin, so they're quick to come up with rebuttals as to why they should put things off. So I don't know about you. I mean, I'm sure we've heard maybe don't have 20% saved, or it's just not the right time to buy. A lot of times we're faced with objections that have really simple rebuttals, for a lack of better words, and simple explanations to kind of overcome those objections.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's essentially why we're here, right? Is because we know that there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding of things, and we want to really set people on the right path and really help them decide if homeownership now is the right thing to approach. So one of the things we talk about is like, why would someone buy now, right? Depending on when you're watching this, interest rates could be perceived as high, they could be perceived as low. We know interest rates are not really a reason to buy or not buy a home,
of course, because they change daily.
But we also know that the sooner you get started on this long-term investment, right, because it's almost like a default savings, the better you are, right? The better off you are long-term. And of course, we also know, the pride of homeownership, right? Being able to live in your own home, make changes the way you want, and not have to worry about, potentially having to be evicted, or maybe the landlord selling the house, right?
Right, of course.
Any other reasons that, as far as like why buying a home now?
I think that everybody's case is a little bit different as to why buy a home now, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I personally have a big pride of home ownership now, having purchased last July of 2022, also in the height of the market when everybody else was facing the same objections. But now the things that I once cared about don't mean so much to me anymore, because now I just want my home to be a certain way. So the pride of home ownership is 100%.
Yeah, we got to get that pool set up for the summer's coming, so we got to make sure we get that opened up.
Seriously, soon enough.
Pride and ownership of that pool, so Pete can come hang out. And,
make sure it's not green, just in time for summer.
Yeah. All right, so take us through, we always go through the example of like owning versus renting, right? So we're talking
Sure.
about, why would you buy now versus, waiting, and we always compare that to renting. So walk us through an example of why it would make sense from a financial perspective to buy now instead of renting.
Sure. So let's say that we're looking at a home purchase of $250,000 based on standard interest rates. Your monthly payment is $1,200 a month. And let's say that you never refinance, never sell for 30 years. You own that, you hold that home, make your payments. In 30 years, you'll own it outright based on appreciation. Let's say it's worth over 400 grand at that point. At least it's something that you own. It was almost like a forced savings,
Right.
as opposed to someone that maybe was renting long term for 30 years. Let's say they were renting for $1,200 a month, and that never changed.
For
Right?
30 years, right? Yeah.
Let's pretend.
Pretend the rent hasn't changed for 30 years.
Exactly. So pretend it never changed. Add that up. Essentially, you're over $400,000 of rent paid that you have nothing to show for at the end. So almost always, I would say long term, or owning versus renting makes sense unless you have some crazy good deal and you can guarantee that rent will never go up.
Yeah, and I mean, that's also not to say that there aren't actual reasons to not buy right now, right?
Of course.
So there are actual reasons. Like, we're not here just to tell everybody like, oh, you should buy, like, no matter what, no, that's not the case, right? So we know one reason that I always think is really important is, affordability, but not affordability as, can I purchase this home because the purchase price is so high? Really looking down at what does it equate to monthly? What does that monthly payment look like? And are those monthly payments too high that I'm going to be what we call house poor, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be living to make mortgage payments. That's not why any of us sell homes, buy homes, anything like that. So what's another reason that maybe someone would?
Sometimes people just don't know where they want to be, right? So I always say that owning a home is good for the long term, but if you have hesitancies that you might be selling in 12 months based on market volatility, there's a chance you could lose money after your closing costs and things like that. So I would say that you should be in a position that what you're purchasing is at least a semi long-term thought, at least something that you have intentions of being in for a little, a decent amount of time.
Yeah, the conversation for someone who's buying a home for the next 2 to 5 years is a lot different than the conversation we have with someone who's buying a home for 5 years plus, right?
Exactly.
And the reason for that is, just like you said, there's, you don't really start to see the build up in principal until later in the life of the loan. And we'll talk about that more, but really just because you're playing a short game instead of the long game, right? We know over 30 years in real estate, you always come up on top. At least that's what the history shows us.
Exactly. A couple other things too that I've seen, even people potentially changing jobs. A lot of times if you don't know where you're going to be at in a career-wise, maybe it's not the best thing to lock yourself into a big purchase like that.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I've seen that a lot as well.
for sure. So those are some good reasons not to buy right away, maybe not to buy now. So all right, so let's move into what happens in the real estate market to determine your approach, right? So right now, as of this recording, we are in a very strong seller's market, have been for some time. So we're seeing a different market, right? So we're seeing what we call a seller's market. So a seller's market is essentially when there are not enough homes for sale for the amount of people who want to buy them. It's really simple supply and demand. And by having more buyers searching for the product, which in this case is a home, causes the competition for those homes to go up, which then causes the price of those homes to go up. So that's what we would consider a seller's market. In a seller's market, you have to expect that, you have to go in competitive, right? That's what we're seeing now.
100%.
We're seeing a lot of offers on properties. Sellers are really in the driver's seat. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about a buyer's market? What are some of the things in a buyer's market?
Yeah, so in an ideal world for buyers, a buyer's market is essentially having more homes for sale than there are buyers. So you're able to maybe make offers slightly under asking, maybe some more agreeable terms in behalf of the buyer. But to your point, Pete, I feel like you haven't really seen much of a buyer's market in the last several years, just due to the overall housing shortage.
Yeah. Yeah. And really one of I'd say the biggest indicators of whether you're in a buyer or seller's market is you look at the days on market. Because even in a seller's market, days on market is important because you're trying to decide, okay, where do I go in on this property as far as from an offer perspective? And the longer a home is on the market, the more flexibility you typically have with price and things like that. And in a seller's market, you see typically very low days on market. In some cases, could be a week or two, like what we're seeing now. In a more balanced market, I'd say probably, you start to see an average of 30 days to 60 days on market. When you start to see more than 60 days on market, you're heading really into a buyer's market. And, I know for a lot of buyers out there right now, they're itching to see that, but no sign of that coming yet. So, all right, perfect. So let's transition into, again, we said we're going to go through the 10 steps to home buying. So what's step one?
Deciding to buy.
Deciding to buy.
Which sounds like most of you have tuned in today, already kind of made that decision by at least getting to learn a little bit more about the process.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we know that step one is deciding to buy. So we talked about some of the things already that you want to maybe take into consideration, maybe some myths. Now, something that we always talk about, because again, we talked about this earlier when we were comparing home ownership to rents, is building equity and really understanding what equity is, right? So I think sometimes, especially for us in the industry, we throw these terms around: equity, escrow, all these things that maybe people don't understand.
Right.
So what is equity, right? So equity is essentially when you're looking at a home and you purchase it, the day you close on the property, you have as much equity in the home as you essentially put into it, meaning your down payment, that's now what we consider your equity. When we look at about 22 years down the road, that level of equity should have increased with every mortgage payment you've made, paying down the principal, which means you now have more equity in your home. And then depending on the loan type, we see most commonly 30-year loans. At the end, your last mortgage payment in year 30, you've now paid off the entire home. So now that you have equity in that entire home.
Right. And I always just like to mention, too, with this example, because a lot of people look at you like you have three heads when it says, how is it in year 22 on a 30-year mortgage? I'm only halfway done. So I always like to mention that with mortgages, they're always front-loaded with interest. Frankly speaking, the bank doesn't care how much equity you have. They want their interest. So, that's kind of why it takes 22 years to get halfway through. Yeah. But at the end, you really start to power away at the principal balance.
Right. So those early mortgage payments are going to more interest than principal. But then as you get to the latter part of the loan, you start to build up, pay down more principal. Yep. Perfect. All right, cool. So then next is step two. And step two is finding your agent. So this is my favorite part of the whole thing, right? But no, I mean, all joking aside, right? What does, listen, I was fortunate enough to help you buy a home. So what are some things that you looked for in an agent, right? I mean, you have, not to, blow this out of proportion, but you have a lot of agents that you could have chosen to work with. And
sure.
We're, both Ashley and myself are super grateful that you chose us.
Yeah, of course.
So just more generally speaking, what's something that you were looking for and that you feel, you have clients, right, who you refer to, who work with other agents too.
Right.
What are qualities that you look for in partners, that you tell your clients to look for in finding an agent?
Sure. So obviously, you very similar to a lot of the agents that I work with. What I look for when trying to partner with my agents is someone that actually has a deep understanding of the market, right? I don't necessarily need somebody who's moving 3 hours away. You probably wouldn't be the best fit for them, right? So it's someone that understands the market that they're in, someone that could help find the home that fits their criteria, and also has a clear understanding of their wants versus needs, in my opinion. Because I know that there's a lot of buyers out there that'll send you 50 homes, and a good agent would be able to tell you right away, hey, I didn't send that to you because I understand that you need 4 bedrooms, so let's not look at 3 bedrooms, right? So I think that it's someone with a deep understanding of your needs as a client, more than anything.
Yeah. And I mean, something I'll just add to that too is, having a good team around them, right? We consider you to be a great team member. We have other, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the other partners that you need throughout this process. Good negotiation skills, right?
Huge.
You really need somebody who, you don't need, but you should have somebody who's really looking out for your best interest, right?
But also communicates well with the seller's side too.
Yeah.
Right? Because in this market, we understand too that sometimes you need to know what's important to the sellers to have that structured in your negotiating skills and your offers.
Yeah. No, that's a great point actually, because, years ago, the buyer's realtor would actually go in and present to the sellers, and actually.
I didn't know. Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Present an offer to the sellers, where now, the buyer communicates the offer to the agent, then the agent communicates the offer to the other agent, and then the other agent communicates it to the seller.
It's a game
right?
of telephone.
So you really have to make sure that it's clear and concise. Some things that we've done, like adding videos, in our emails, really outlining the offer. All these little things can help, your chances, because it's like anything else, right? If we start getting confused, we want to shut down. We're
Exactly.
like, no, it's too confusing. I'm not interested. So clear, concise, and yeah, definitely all the things that you had mentioned before. So the other thing that we talk a lot about is, buyer loyalty agreements or exclusive buyer agreements, right? So we call it a loyalty agreement because it's a little bit different, but essentially it's the same, right? We're essentially asking the client to commit to us, and we're committing to the client, right? But in that agreement, it should clearly outline what is expected of the buyer's agent and what is expected of the buyer. And one thing I would encourage every buyer to consider hiring a buyer's agent, not just bouncing around from agent to agent. That's certainly an option. Tends to take a little bit longer, and sometimes you're not always sure if that person has your best interest, right? When you hire an agent, when you actually, commit to a realtor, you should always have an easy exit, clause, right? There should always be something in there that says if the agent is not showing up the way you expect, that you can terminate the deal.
Of course.
Right? But what you're really looking for is, we know sellers agents, right? They market the home. They're looking for prospective buyers. With a buyer's agent, you don't always see that same approach, right? A lot of times it's, we're gonna agree to work together. We're gonna get an idea of what you're looking for, and then we're just gonna wait till what comes on the MLS, and we'll go see it, and I'll schedule it, and everybody has the same information.
Yeah.
What you really should be looking for in a buyer's agent is someone who has an actual proven plan to increase your chances of finding the home of your dreams, right? That seems pretty logical.
Of course.
We're always, evolving with the times and trying to see what's working, what's not. So yeah, I mean, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about that, you can reach out to us, schedule a one-on-one conversation, and we can talk to you a little bit more. There's really too much. I don't want to go into too much of that right now, but the point is, you should be hiring someone who's going to advocate for you. Right? Someone who's going to work on your behalf.
100%.
So that's just a little bit about buyer's loyalty agreement. And then when to hire an agent, right? That is something that comes up quite a bit too.
Sure.
So take us through that. I mean, when should the people out there, when should they start reaching out to us and start talking to us?
Yeah, so I think that we could agree from what we've seen with several clients that we've worked with. Some people find a home next week, and some people it takes 6 to 12 months. So I would say the best time to really talk to an agent if you're serious about buying a home is today, right? On average, there's kind of a timeline in terms of from the time that they meet the agent to getting pre-approved, to finding a house, to getting an offer accepted, to getting to the closing table, right? So there's no one set standard as to how quick this process will be. But the easiest thing that I say is that if you are serious, it doesn't hurt to have a conversation and actually hire an agent like yourself or individuals like.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, if I said, Scott, I want to buy a house today, right? So that process, I would meet with you, right? And you would ask me some questions about how much I make, what my income looks like, how much I owe every single month. Assets, what I have to use, and that kind of stuff. Now, how much does it cost to have that conversation?
Totally free. So I always joke. I mean, I say at the end of our conversation, if you absolutely hate me, it didn't cost you anything, and on we go. So yeah, completely free.
Okay, so we have that conversation completely, free of charge, no obligation.
Correct.
And then from there, we decide, okay, am I kind of ready, or are there some things that I need to change? And we'll talk a little more detail about this. So we get everything's good. We get the pre-approval, or maybe I got to clean some things up, so maybe gives me a couple of weeks to get everything to you, and we get pre-approved.
Yep.
Then we get out there and we start searching for the home, and depending on the market, could take anywhere, as you mentioned. Now, we have sold the first home that someone has seen,
done that,
but that doesn't happen very often. So typically, you see a good, half a dozen to a dozen homes before you kind of make that decision. That usually happens over the course of a couple of weeks. In a more challenging market for a buyer, it could take, a couple of months.
Yep.
So it all varies, right? But then we also know from the time you find that home to the time you close and move in, typically on average, we're seeing about 45 to 60 days.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking, okay, I want to move and be moved in for the new school year, right? We hear that as a common motivation. Really, you want to start having that conversation either the end of the year prior or in the very beginning of that year. Now, that doesn't mean if you have the conversation, you need to just jump out there and start, putting offers on homes necessarily. But we always encourage people, at least reach out to us. Let's have that conversation because, one, you might be closer than you think. And two, the house for you, we might already have or have coming up soon. So you don't want to miss that opportunity as well. The sooner we can get to work for you, the sooner we can make your dreams come true.
And similarly too, I mean, you might be more ready than you think, but you might not even be ready. So if you think you're holding off because you'll be ready in another 3-4 months, you might not necessarily know what you should be focusing on in the meantime.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. And I mean, you've had that situation come up.
All the time.
What do you do in that situation?
Well, that's the thing. It's a tough conversation to have sometimes. If individuals actually hold off and don't start a conversation with me thinking they're going to purchase in 2 months, and it turns out that their credit isn't even close to what they thought it was, well, then it takes them 3-4 months to build up, and it only delays things.
Right.
So again, there's no harm in having a conversation sooner than later.
Yeah, and you give them some tips, right?
You have
help
to.
them. Yeah,
of course.
Right. Awesome. All right, so let's get into, we have our let's get into the 7 steps to financing a property, right?
Sure.
We have it broken down into really 7 steps to getting your financing in order to get pre-approved, to get out there and start making homes. Start seeing homes and making offers on homes. So what's the first step?
First step is really establishing your budget. So ultimately, it's about having a conversation to identify your current expenses. Because let's face it, a mortgage is a debt. We need to find a way to fit that mortgage into what you're already responsible for paying. Student loans, car payments, credit cards, things like that. So we definitely want to identify some expenses. And we also want to tailor a mortgage that's going to suit your lifestyle, right? So if you like to go out to eat, things like that, how you mentioned before, you don't want to be house poor. We don't want you to be house poor. So we want to make sure that whatever we give you is going to kind of coincide with your current lifestyle. But at the same time, too, if you maybe recognize, hey, maybe I do spend a little recklessly and maybe I should tailor back, we could kind of cover that too, help decide where your money goes every month, and then find a way to make it all intertwine. But ultimately establishing your budget.
So go from like the sushi boat to like maybe just 1 or 2 rolls.
Okay. Chop it down a little bit.
Gotcha.
Sushi's endless, though. You know how that goes.
I know.
You never fill up.
Okay, so establishing your budget, getting an idea of what you're comfortable with on a monthly basis.
Yep.
And then what's next?
So I would also say just kind of understanding mortgages in general, right? So it's important for you to understand what goes into it in terms of, down payment, interest rates, as well as the term, how long the mortgage is, all kind of factors into what your monthly payment plays out to be. Okay. But once we have an understanding of mortgages, then we need to kind of choose who the right lender is. Again, your favorite part was finding the right realtor. Yeah. I like to think this is my favorite part, but let's face it, there's a lot of good lenders out there. I know you work with a few as well that I know personally. But whoever you decide, in my opinion, should always be someone that understands your market, right? So I am licensed in a few different states, but I do target mainly New Jersey because I know it so well. Right. So someone that understands where you're purchasing. I would also say someone that has a solid reputation. So if you Google their name and their company, you'll be able to pull up real reviews of them, as opposed to maybe someone that's never done a transaction before. So you want somebody that's kind of have a proven history, and it's also nice to have somebody with a brick and mortar. Right. So my office is in Lyndhurst. I've had clients go to the office all the time if they want to see me face to face. Definitely kind of hold some accountability there too. I can't hide, so to speak.
Yeah.
So,
and some of the things that you do too, which we really appreciate and have been helpful, is following up after we make an offer on behalf of our buyers, right? Following up and calling and just letting them know, like, hey, just want to see if you have any questions. Like, it's always great to have that second touch, because I can say from the seller's agent perspective, knowing that the lender on the other side is going to do the right things gives me confidence, and I relay that to my seller. Like, hey, look, they reached out and they called.
And I've actually, personally seen that as something proven to work, right? So by calling the listing agent, I've had several listing agents say, I've been doing this 15 years, I've never had a lender call me first.
Yeah.
So I do think that it does carry weight, and, tip to the lenders out there that if you are watching, you could take this one out of my book. You could call your listing agents. It helps a lot.
Oh, we're giving away the secret. Sorry,
it's
Scott.
all right. It's all right.
But the other thing that you do, look, I mean, there really are no secrets. It's just we
course.
know, we know that most of the people in this business know what to do. It's just a matter of
100%,
if
just
they're
doing it.
Doing it.
Exactly.
But then the other thing that you do too is you send me listings sometimes when you're like, hey, did you see this one? And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's helpful too, and it shows that you're working, for them and
Just
not
trying to find different ways to get people in front of opportunities. That's what it comes down to.
All right, cool. So we have a good understanding of our budget. We have a good understanding of how the mortgages work and what we kind of need to take into consideration. We've chosen you as our lender because we want to make sure we're working with the right one. What do we do next?
So really, we need to get pre-approved, right? So in the initial budget conversation that we have, that's kind of me doing a pre-qualification. What a pre-qualification is, it's a conversation where we get an idea as to what your income looks like, assets, credit, debt, etc. By the end of that conversation, we usually have a pretty good understanding as to what it is that you would qualify for, but I can't give you anything. There's no tangible letter. There's no proof that we even had that conversation. So now if you get pre-qualified and you go to Pete, your realtor, and he says, okay, cool, what do you got for me? And they say, well, I spoke to Scott. Pete doesn't know what that means. So,
great. That's great.
That's great.
We're on the right track, but we got to
Halfway there.
We got to take that extra step.
Exactly. So basically, the pre-approval is actually taking the time to complete an application, getting income documents and asset, and having your credit checked. Ultimately, verifying everything that we discussed verbally. Then I could give you a tangible letter that says, I, Scott Cummings at Annie Mac, had reviewed income, assets, credit, and now I can say with my name on it that I backed them to purchase this home if they decide to move forward.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you always call it, right? It's your ticket to shop.
Pretty much your ticket to shop. And I always like to make a disclaimer too, because I feel like a lot of people feel once they're pre-approved, there's no going back. I have people that are pre-approved and they just end up not buying. It's totally fine. It's really just your ticket to shop, puts you in a position to buy a home, doesn't force you to buy a home.
Right.
And they're completely free.
Right.
So I always feel the need to stress that too.
And a question I get quite a bit is how long do they last?
So pre-approvals are typically good for 90 days. And the reason they're good for 90 days is because your credit report typically expires in 120 days. So one of the big things that we always cover too is once you are pre-approved, don't change jobs, don't spend your down payment, don't do anything that could otherwise jeopardize what we've already worked so hard to get. Right. So after 90 days, we'll probably just need some updated pay stubs, bank statements, things like that to make sure that we refresh it.
Right. Okay, cool. So pre-qualification, is like dipping your toe in the water.
Yeah.
Kind of really just getting a feel with no real commitments we already said pre-approval is no commitment, but you can only do so much. Once you get pre-approved, now you're ready. Now you're really in the game, right? Now you're in the pool and you're really ready to start making some.
You're ready
happen.
To make an offer if you come across the right home.
Perfect. So now let's fast forward a little bit. We've got all that. We're good to go. Mm-hmm. We found the right house. We got an offer accepted, right? So we're going to provide you, right? We're going to send this over to you. We're going to say, hey, Scott, awesome, great news. So-and-so got their offer accepted. Here's the contract. Yep. Now, what's the conversation you have with the buyers once you have that,
So
contract?
basically, once we get the contract, it's about finalizing the numbers that we originally went over. So I don't usually let my clients submit an offer until they have a ballpark as to what the monthly payments will look like. But once you have an offer accepted, then we know, okay, for certain, this is what the property taxes look like. This is the offer price, deciding what your down payment is really going to be, where your interest rate is. That's usually when we lock you to once you actually have your offer accepted. And it's kind of like really tailoring and finalizing the numbers that were pretty close. But once you have the offer accepted, we could really hone in on specifics.
Right. So that's an important thing, I think, to note too, right? Is when you're going through that pre-approval process, right? You're not tied to an interest rate. You're not locked into, really much of anything. You just know now that you're qualified, you're ready to go. It's once you have that offer in hand and the house that you're buying with the taxes and what the rates are current, that's really when you're making decisions, right?
Exactly, because anything up until then with interest rates changing daily, and as an example, I've had people ask me, hey, can we lock while we're shopping? There's lenders out there that offer that. I mean, I think we even have something very similar, but interest rates are locked for a predetermined amount of time that if we end up expiring and then have to extend, it ends up being a cost to the borrower where it almost never makes sense. And the interest rates are usually much higher for that, long-term lock and shop, so to speak. So, right. Yeah, I mean, at the end, that's when we'll really start to kind of finalize numbers and hone in on everything.
Yeah, and I think you just gave a good example of how, there's a lot of nuances in this business and in the mortgage industry specifically. So it is important to have somebody who's going to walk you through that, give you your options, and tell you black and white of like what this is. Yes, you can do this, but understand it also comes with that
Totally.
risk.
And I would also say too, though, just you know, to kind of make it clear with the interest rates, right? They don't make 1% shifts overnight, right? It's nothing drastic like that. And usually if you're submitting an offer, I'll tell you where the rates are that day. So there won't really be any surprises. But again, until you're actually formally locked, may not be until, or is not until you actually have an offer accepted.
Right. Awesome. I know a lot of conversations are around interest rates. So
These days, it's all interest rates. Yeah.
I think you gave people a lot to think about. So hopefully, you know, that's some good stuff for them.
sure.
So, all right. So we've got the offer accepted. Now we're you know, we've decided on the mortgage payment or the mortgage options. What else? Like, how do we get to the closing table? What are some other steps?
All right. So once we have the offer accepted, we finalized all our numbers, we submit it over to our processing and underwriting team. They're going to review, make sure that I did my job correctly, which I always like to think I do. They'll basically kind of finalize things, make sure that all the documents that we have are up to date, simultaneously while we're getting an appraisal ordered, as well as title. So an appraiser will go out to the home ultimately to make sure that the home is worth what you're buying it for, because we as a bank only want to give you a certain amount of money. And if you're overpaying for the home, well, then that could kind of jeopardize your ability to qualify. So we have an independent third party go out to see this home to kind of help us determine the value to make sure that we as a bank are making a smart investment as well. So appraisal gets done.
So, and just to kind of clarify that, what that essentially means is that the bank is making sure you're paying either what the home is worth in an appraiser's eyes or more, which if it appraises for more, great for you. You have that thing equity we were talking about earlier. So you got a little more equity. There's no problem there. When it underappraises, to your point, that's when you run
If it's
into,
worth less than you agreed to buy it for, we could run into a problem. Exactly.
And that, you know, without, in the interest of, you know, keeping it kind of simple here, that's another conversation at that point, and we just cross that bridge when we come to it and we figure it out.
Exactly. But I appreciate the clarification. So once we have appraisal being done, the other thing that we are making sure is ordered appropriately is title. And me and Pete always joke, we have so many great title reps. These poor guys, they don't get any love, but they are super important in the process. Their job is to ultimately make sure that the home is clearly transferred from one person's name into the other person's name. So they're running searches with the county, the state, the town that it's in, making sure that all mortgages are paid at closing. So again, give my title guys some love. They deserve it. They're a vital part of this process.
Yeah, it's not the sexiest part of a real estate transaction, but it is
probably one of the most necessary.
If not the most important.
Exactly.
So, all right, awesome. So now we've got appraisal, we've got title, we've got everything pretty much locked up. What do we do next?
Getting ready to close.
That's it. That's the exciting time.
Closing day.
All right. So anything specific we should know about closing?
So at closing, I would say it's just important for you to, through closing, just remain kind of on point with all your finances. Don't change anything. Still don't quit your job. Can't stress that enough. Don't spend your down payment. Just kind of keep everything exactly the way that you had it.
Perfect. Okay, cool. And so that pretty much sums it up, right? From the financial perspective, big picture, that pretty much sums it up.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So one term that we hear a lot is pity payment.
Sure.
So break it down for us. What is a pity payment when someone hears pity payment?
Sure. So it stands for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So principal and interest is your actual mortgage payment. That's what you're paying the bank every single month based on whatever your interest rate is at that time over the amount of time that you have it, 15, 30 years. Taxes are your property taxes. Every home in every town, in every block, in every county, every home is different. So your property taxes divided by 12 gives you your taxes. And then your homeowner's insurance is basically there to protect you if, God forbid, something happens to the home. You could shop around for that. You know, on average, you know, you could see, I'm not going to give a quote here, but, you know, you could be somewhere in that low range, but ultimately equating to a total monthly payment that you make every single month.
Gotcha. And yeah, and that's what we always say is the most important, right, is your monthly payment, because that's what you live with month in and month out.
100%. At the end of the day, you got to make that every month. So make sure you're comfortable with it.
All right, cool, man. Anything else we should know about, you know, the financing and the mortgage end of the home purchase process?
No, we summed it up pretty good. I would just say it's big numbers are always scary. So I would always just say kind of chop it down in small bits. but it doesn't have to be such an overwhelming thing. You know, it's a lot, but it could be broken down in a way that's super simple and easily digestible.
Awesome, man. All right, cool. All right, so then I guess we're moving on to the next step in the home buying process, right? Which is identifying your criteria, right? Now, this is an important part of sitting down with home buyers, just because what we really need to figure out is, you know, what is most important to you in a home? How are we going to save you time by eliminating things that are not important? And where should we be marketing to, or, you know, putting our ears to the ground to see where, you know, these homes might be, right? The worst thing you could do is, you know, this process of home buying can be tough at times. One of the easiest ways to burn out really quickly is to not be super clear on what you're looking for. And now that's going to evolve, right? It's going to change throughout the process as you start to see a couple of homes, which is why it's important that we ask for feedback, right? So some of the things you want to consider, right? The old adage, location, right? That's, you know, you can never change the location. You can always change the home. And then really going through like your needs and your wants, right? So then that really brings us to the next step, which is really finding your home, right? Which is really, again, it really is just the same thing, which is just the needs versus wants, right? We want to know, you know, Scott, when we were looking for your home, what was something that you needed to have, like needed?
Yeah, so that was, I mentioned it before, right? In my own example, I need 4 bedrooms, right?
4 bedrooms. So Scott, if I send you a 3-bedroom house, what is that going to say to you?
I shouldn't even be looking at it, you know,
Right.
and the realtor's clearly not listening.
Yeah, he's not listening. They're not paying attention to what I need.
Exactly.
And what was something that you would have loved to have that we would say, you know, that was a want?
Fireplace, and I did get it.
Okay, so we got you 4 bedrooms and a fireplace. So
it was a win-win.
Just saying, guys, we got him what he needed.
Proven success.
No, but all joking aside, right? So essentially, if a home had 3 bedrooms, you didn't even want to look at it, right? It didn't even make sense for you to waste your time to go see it.
Right.
However, if a home had 4 bedrooms, amongst other things, but
Sure.
4 bedrooms and didn't have a fireplace, you were still open to seeing it.
Of course.
Right? And those are the kinds of conversations that we have. And we want to make sure that we're super clear on, because if we're clear on it, we can help you stay clear on it, stay focused, save time, and really spend your time off, right? Because you're seeing homes with your time off,
Right.
You know, seeing the best fits possible, or not seeing homes, which can also be very helpful. So
Totally.
No, and something we always like to talk about is, you know, the online systems, right?
Yeah.
The Z's,
Yeah.
all the different, you know, the different online websites. So I always like to take a minute to kind of explain how these online websites work, right? So most consumers think, right? So that, well, let me back up a little bit. So the way these online websites get their information for homes that are on the market is they pull from what's called an MLS, which is a multiple listing service that realtors who have listings post on,
Correct.
right? So these online websites pull from the MLS and then distribute it to the masses so that everybody can really see this information.
Their marketing.
Now, if you've ever been on any of these websites before, you'll know that on the side, there's a little thing that says, you know, schedule an appointment or talk to a realtor or find out more. And it'll ask for your name, phone number, email, that kind of thing. So these, you would think, if you were filling that out, that you would speak to the person who's actually listing the home, right? The person who's actually been in the home, knows the seller. But the reality is these websites actually sell your information to real estate agents and mortgage lenders and different service professionals, which is why if you've ever filled one of those out, you've gotten immediately bombarded with, you know,
Tons of phone calls.
Because
emails.
It doesn't even just go to one person. It
Never.
goes to several people. So it's, you know, listen, it's a good tool to be able to look through photos and see kind of what the house might look like. But, you know, and we tell our clients, like, listen, whatever is the easiest for you to use, right? Then you use that one.
Yep.
But just send it to us, right? Send it to us. We'll get you the information, because a lot of people don't understand that these online websites are really just using your information to profit by selling it to other agents.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
just an important thing to just keep in mind. Another thing that we, you know, like to consider when we're talking about this stuff is, you know, what kind of home, right? So should we consider a condo or a townhouse? what are just, when I say condo, townhouse versus single family, what it's like one or two things that come to mind? Pros and cons, right?
So pros, I would say minimal maintenance, right? So you're paying the HOA to kind of do the heavy work for you. You don't have to cut the grass. You don't have to shovel snow, things like that. And an overall, easier lifestyle, maybe some amenities. Sometimes you get a pool, a gym, things like that. But the cons being you do have a monthly expense with HOAs, and you kind of have shared living space. So for some people, if privacy is an issue, naturally, having shared walls with somebody may not be as great.
Right. Yeah, no, those are great points among others.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing we kind of encourage people, I think, a little bit more to consider, especially, younger home buyers, is a multifamily.
Big
right?
advocate.
I mean, listen, we could do a whole other video, podcast, whatever on
go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah,
but we'll try.
And
we'll
we'd
not,
love
we
to.
will, yeah,
we would love to, but that's not what this is for. But some things, just pros and cons of a multifamily, right? You build. One of the downsides is they're generally, a higher barrier of entry, right?
More expensive,
More expensive to buy. One of the downsides can also be you're living with somebody else, right? And that can sometimes be a little tough.
Right.
But some of the positives, in my mind, severely outweigh it, which is, you build equity significantly faster.
And the rent offsets the cost of your mortgage.
Rent offsets your living expenses. It just gives you options financially. I mean, again, we'll cut it there.
We'll stop there. Yeah.
We'll keep talking. But
the list could go on and on.
All right. So in the interest of time, let's keep moving forward. So we know that, so we've identified the criteria. Now it's time to start making an offer. So, we really talk about three things to consider when we're talking about making an offer. One of them is price. So what does that conversation look like when you're talking to a client about price?
So my biggest thing on price, again, we've said it a few times now, is that payment should be more important than price. Right. I think that nobody wants to overpay or nobody wants to admit that they overpaid. But ultimately, what does that correlate to on a payment? So listing price or a list price could be subjective. Someone could list for $100,000 if they really wanted to and let price be demanded by the amount of people looking to buy it. So I would say that price is subjective to a certain degree. But what I do always like to mention to people is usually for every $10,000 borrowed, it makes a difference of about $50 a month on your payment. So sometimes, seeing something listed for $400,000 and you only want to go in at list price, going in at $410 for the difference of $50 a month could be you living in that home or not. So I would say price is it's subjective, it's important, but it's not everything, if you could understand that.
Well, no, and what I hear you saying, though, is that, you really break it down to just giving that information, right? So we talked about it earlier as far as, lifestyle and decisions you have to make when you're going to purchase a home. And you ultimately, what you're saying is you're making it very clear that going up $10,000, what does that $50 a month mean to you, right? Does that mean maybe not going, we use sushi. Does it maybe mean not buying sushi 2 or 3 times a month and maybe reducing that, right? Are there things that what's more important? And it's not for us to decide for anybody, but it is important that they have that information. So I love that.
Yeah.
We also know terms are important, right? So when we say terms, what do we mean? We mean, the amount of down payment, what your loan product is like. Do you have to sell a home in order to buy this home?
When do you need to close?
When do you need to close? These are all things that can make a difference. Again, we try to gather the information from the sellers to know what they're looking for. And I kind of said terms, but also contingencies. I did mention a few contingencies in there. Do you have to sell in order to buy? Those kinds of things.
Exactly.
So, all right. So we made the offer.
Yep.
And we got our offer accepted.
Congrats, Pete.
Things are awesome. Thank you so much. So really now what's the next step, right? So once we get an offer accepted, we here in the northern part of New Jersey, we use real estate attorneys. Southern Jersey is a little different. They sometimes just use title companies, but for where we are, we enter a process called the attorney review process. The attorney review process essentially means that the seller hires an attorney and the buyer hires an attorney.
Exactly.
And they review the contract from a legal perspective. They clearly outline anything that might be misunderstood and pretty much give us dates of performance.
Exactly.
Now, the one thing that I always think is important to point out is that you really, you get your offer accepted by filling out an offer, sending it to the seller signs it and sends it back.
Exactly.
You have 3 days to get it to an attorney and start the attorney review process. The attorney review process does not have any definitive time ending date.
Right.
It could go on for weeks. It could be done in 24 to 48 hours. With that being said, once you have that stuff done, once the attorneys have reviewed it, once they sign off on it, you go back under contract. That's when you have a legally binding document, when you have what's called under contract.
Exactly. And I always just like to mention that's why it's super important to get a good attorney that moves quickly too. Because sometimes while it's sitting in attorney review, technically speaking, someone could come in and get another better offer and actually cancel your attorney review. So definitely important we move swiftly.
Yeah, great point. It's two-sided, right? I always notice that like after we make that first offer, buyers tend to make offers easier because they realize it's not like, oh my God, I'm gonna
Exactly.
So all right, cool. So then once we go under contract, we start our inspection period. Inspection period is a defined time, so it's typically somewhere between 7 and 14 days, right?
Yep.
What are some things, I don't know if you remember anything from your home inspection that
As far as what deal breakers go,
no,
or
not
like
even deal breakers, but like, we always say like the home inspection is for the major components,
Sure.
right? So was there anything that stands out to you that you remember from your home inspection where it was like, oh, okay, that's something I know I need to address, but isn't like,
yeah, exactly. Like
right?
it was the age of the hot water heater, right? So, it's almost at its life. So it's important that I get that on the radar there, but not necessarily something that I need to kill a contract for. It's not a reason to not buy a house.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, we always say that the home inspection is for the major components, right?
Yep.
So what does that mean? That's the foundation,
Holes in the roof,
the
cracks in the
roof,
foundation,
cracks in the foundation. The big stuff, air conditioning, electric, plumbing. Really, those are the big things, right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about scratches in the floor or chipped paint, anything that you could reasonably see and inspect on your own.
Exactly.
Right? That you wouldn't need a professional for.
Right.
You bring in a professional, speaking of that, licensed home inspector professional, and they write you up a report, right? And once you have that report, now you have the second part of this inspection period, which is, deciding what do we want to ask the sellers to repair, right? And I think we're both kind of the mindset that you focus on the important stuff,
Always.
right? Less is more.
Yep.
Some people will take the approach of just throw everything at them. It's again, going back to the buyers and sellers markets, you got to live in the moment and understand what the situation is of this particular transaction and what the market looks like.
Right, because the sellers have some leverage at this point, too, that if they don't agree to the terms of what you're asking for, they could always relist it. So, just important that you kind of focus on what matters.
Yeah, and another way to look at that is if we know that it's something that's going to come up in the next inspection, the sellers are more inclined to address that because it's going to come up in any inspection.
Exactly.
But so then we've got the inspection report. We come to an agreement. One of two things could happen depending on what it is, right? Either the seller could decide to repair the issues before closing and provide you receipts and proof that it was done.
Yep.
Or they could offer you a credit, right? And a credit goes to closing costs. So let's get into that part as we start to move towards closing. So talk to me about closing costs.
Sure. So closing costs are a large breakdown. Everybody has their hands out at closing for all the services that they perform for the last 30 to 45 days. Good rule of thumb in the state of New Jersey that I always say total cash to close somewhere between $10,000 to $15,000. Obviously, that could be different, higher or lower, but as a good rule of thumb, you figure you're somewhere in that ballpark. You have things like lender fees. Appraisals usually paid prior to closing, title fees, government recording fees, attorney fees, and then also initial funding for your escrow account, which is your taxes and insurance that we discussed earlier.
Right. And it's always important to point out too, because some of those things, right, the things that you'd mentioned, your home inspection, your appraisal, things like that are paid before closing.
Correct.
Right. So those are the items that you're paying out of pocket. You could put it on a credit card. You could pay cash. You could pay any way you want.
Yep.
Now, those things, right, when we were just talking about home inspections getting credited back to a buyer. Now, when home inspection issues are credited back to a buyer, right, they don't actually walk out of closing with a check.
Of course.
They get credited towards their closing costs.
Sure. So as we mentioned, if it was $15,000 of your closing costs and you get a $5,000 seller credit, the net difference would be a total of $10,000 brought to the closing table.
Right, so you're keeping that $5,000 in your bank, and you're bringing that $10,000 to the closing table. Now that's important to keep in mind too. I always like to say that because the items you've already paid for, you can't
Can't get those
credit.
back.
You can't get credited for that.
Exactly.
So your closing costs essentially can only be as much as your credit that you're getting can really only be as much as your closing costs.
Exactly. But good rule of thumb that we've talked about too, I always prefer, if it's up to the buyers, to get a credit rather than to get the repairs done by the seller. Just because a lot of times if you're leaving the house, you might just be putting lipstick on a pig, figuratively
Yeah,
speaking,
right.
just good enough to get the job done where you don't actually care about the work that's being done. So sometimes better just to get that money that you could fix the home the way that you need it to once you close.
Perfect. And then we've got that all resolved. We're going to the closing table. Before we go to the closing table, we do the final walkthrough.
Yep.
Something I always think is really important to point out. I've been there and I've seen buyers agents come through and do the final walkthrough, and they're, just kind of looking around. Everybody's excited to close. Always run the water, turn on the heat, air conditioning, check all that stuff, because that's your last chance.
Exactly. And I even had on my own walkthrough, right? There's a TV from 1998 up in the attic that they expected me to haul out. So, I was concerned that we were going to delay closing, but I didn't want that responsibility, so we had to call them day of. But I do say that if there are any issues with the final walkthrough, don't be afraid to address it, because that's your last chance before it's your problem.
Yeah.
So if you're scared that it's going to delay the closing, you made it that far, you're still going to close, but get that issue taken care of.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so then you do the final walkthrough, you get everything, you're at the closing table. Before after the walkthrough, before the closing, you'll have your final numbers, so
Yep.
you'll know how much you're bringing to the closing.
Exactly.
By way of a certified check.
Yep.
You go to the closing table, loosen up your wrist because there's a lot of
Get it going.
documents to sign, and boom, you're a homeowner.
That's it.
It wasn't so bad.
Easy peasy, all in 45 minutes.
It wasn't so bad.
Not bad.
All right, cool. So let's talk about now, again, you're closed. So what's next, right? So we always say now it's time to move in, but also protect your investment.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes down to actually maintaining the home, right? I think that it's important that, going back to the pride of home ownership, it's important for you to actually reinvest in the things that need reinvestment. Don't let small problems become big problems. When that hot water heater is at the life of its age, and I'm talking to myself here, get it fixed as opposed to waiting for the basement to flood, And there are, of course, home warranties that could possibly cover a majority of those things, but we know how warranties work, so Make sure you read the fine print.
Yep, always read the fine print. And, we always say, you work with us, you enjoy a service of a lifetime, right? We're here, we want to be your realtors for life, your lenders for life. We want to be your go-to resource, not just for the real estate market, which, of course, our goal, at the end of the day through this whole thing is to deliver you the best experience possible, right? We want when we're posting when your friends see your new homeowner post on social media, or, your change of address card that we send out for you, when they ask you, how is it working with them? Our goal is that, you say, hands down, don't even call anybody. Like, Pete is your guy, Scott is your guy. But we also know that you're not going to do that if we don't deliver you a great experience, right?
Of course.
So, that's kind of our approach. We work by referral. We want to deliver a great experience to everybody that we work with. And we also want to be your realtors for life. So what does that mean? That also means, being your go-to for service professionals, financial people, contractors, things of that nature. We're here for the lifetime. So anything else you want to add as we kind of bring this to a close here?
No, I would say that in terms of just piggybacking off the service for a lifetime, I know you do a great job of kind of sending like what your home is worth. I know I get those quarterly or even monthly emails just kind of giving me a status of the market. And on my end, I've had a lot of clients hit me up post-closing with questions about where they're making payments. Just got this in the mail. Is this important? So it doesn't end just on the day of closing.
Right. Exactly. And, we've been doing some fun giveaways.
Yep.
We've been doing some client events, and those are only growing,
Only getting better.
Only getting better. So those are awesome. So, hey, listen, thank you so much. If you're still here for sticking around, we hope this was informative. If there's anything that we can do now or in the future, our contact information is below. We'd love to talk to you. There's no obligation ever. Again, we just want to get you the information that you need to make the best decision possible for yourself and your family. So thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate it, man.
Absolutely. All right. Well, have a great day.
Take care.